Awesome. Hey everyone, my name's Arushi. I'm one of your instructors, and I'm going to be teaching you Web Dev lecture number 1, HTML. All right, let's get right into this. What is this about? Oh, first of all, welcome. So glad to have you here. This is our recorded lecture for those of you who couldn't make it to the actual lecture, and that's completely all right. This is a bit of a unique case because of some technical mishaps. We're having a lecture more in the form of a YouTube video. Usually we'll not be doing this. We'll be having just the recording of the lecture session, so you can also get all the questions. So sorry about that this week. All right, let's get right into it. A little bit of the agenda. Today we're going to set up some expectations for you as well as for me. We're going to set up all of our tech to start this off, and then we're going to go right to it. We're going to intro some web development to you, some HTML to you, and that's what we're going to fix all of it up. All right, let's go. Let's talk about expectations. What do we expect from you? Well, we expect you to do all these lectures, and if you're here, you're already doing that. So good job. You're right on the money. Next, we expect you to kind of follow along on all of the demos we do. We're going to do quite a few demos throughout all our lectures, as well as a little bit off screen as well. Just keep doing them on yourself as well. The easiest way to learn is to do them manually. Number 3, there's going to be some homeworks and some projects. We'll promise we'll keep them very light. It's a club, not a class. It'll be low work, low pressure, but we do expect you to do them. You can't learn web development without getting your hands dirty. So let's get your hands dirty. And finally, this is the biggest rule. If you say something, say something. If you're watching this lecture and at any point you see something that you don't understand, that it's kind of confusing, you want to know more about it, message me, DM me, or put things in the education channel and let's talk about it. But you have to say something. This cannot be just you watching another YouTube video of classes like every other one of your classes. We have to be interactive to learn web development. So let's start doing that. All right, that's about it for expectations. Let's get into setup. What do you need to get through this class? GitHub. Please set yourself up with GitHub. In the next class, we'll be walking over how to put things on the GitHub, how to save things on the GitHub, and what GitHub is. But go to github.com/join and make yourself an account. And if you want to, you can also get the student developer pack, but that's not necessary for now. Just get yourself a GitHub account. Next, get WebStorm. WebStorm is the preferred IDE for this class. What does this mean? There's other editors out there. There's Sublime Text, there's Atom, there's VS Code. All of that is also good. But WebStorm is the one we prefer for you to use because it's the most helpful for young, new beginning developers. It's just a very comfortable platform to use. We highly recommend it. I'm not going to be using WebStorm because it just makes video sharing and video recording a little bit slower. I'm going to be using Sublime. So you can, at least for this class, use whatever you want, but please get WebStorm set up as soon as possible. All right, local hosting. We're going to skip right over this. This is not relevant right now. We're going to cover this in next class. There's maybe going to be an article about this in the Slack. Keep an eye out. And this is something that's helpful, not necessary. So we're going to skip it for now. And finally, lecture times. The first lecture is 9:30 to 11 p.m. on Mondays. That just happened. I'm recording this right after this. And the second lecture is on Wednesday, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Be there if you can. It's really helpful, really nice to be in person and walk through the class together. Trust me, it'll be a much better learning experience than this YouTube video of a lecture. So if you can make it, please do make it. Awesome. With that, let's get into this. We're going to go straight into web development. Let's talk about it. What is web development? It's the creation of the internet. Everything you see on the internet, every web page, Google, Apple, Facebook, all of it is a result of some web development. Things you see on your phone, things you see on your iPad, things that you see on your computer. It's all web development in different forms and different stages. And we're going to teach you a pretty wide breadth of all of it. So what is web development? It is the work involving design, creation, and maintenance of a website. Everything you see on the World Wide Web is a product of this web development. And the last point, let's talk about this a little more. It can be split into 2 parts, front end and back end. Front end is everything the user sees. It's called the client side of development. And the back end is, of course, the non-client side. So taking the example of Google, when you open Google up, you see that search bar and you type things up and it displays things. That display, that search bar, that's all front-end development because you as a user can see all of it. But when you search something on Google, it pops up a bunch of results, right? where do those results come from? They come from the backend. So the backend takes in like the request to get all the information about whatever you put in, and it figures all the information out and it formats the data for you and sends it back over to the front end, and then the front end takes it and displays it. So the front end is the thing you see, the back end is the thing that figures out what the front end is showing you. All right, let's get into the next step. We just described front end, we just described back end. We're going to ignore both of them. They don't matter for this lecture. This lecture, we're going to talk about basic stack. Basic stack is the basis of everything the internet is based on. It's generally just 3 languages: HTML, CSS, JavaScript. To understand basic stack a little bit, we here at Web Dev at Berkeley like to use something called the house analogy. What is the house analogy? Well, it's the idea that all these 3 languages are kind of like a house. HTML is all the resources that are going to making the house. The glass of the glass windows, the wood of the doors, the cement that puts the house together, all those resources, when you just throw them together in a general area and just leave them there, that's HTML. HTML's job is to just get the resources in that general area. Then CSS comes in and it says, yeah, the window needs to be 3 feet off the ground, and it needs to be 5 feet by 4 feet in dimension, and it needs to be like rounded on the edges. That's CSS's job. It takes all those resources and puts them where they're supposed to, puts them in general areas of where they're supposed to be, and makes them look pretty. But a house can't just be like non-functional, right? You want the house to have switches that turn the light on and off. You want it to have a fan and all these other things, right? So you want the house to be responsive. You want the house to respond to things you do. That's JavaScript for you. JavaScript takes parts of the code and makes them responsive as per what the user asks them to do. So the JavaScript is like saying to the house, hey, when I flip the switch, turn on the light. That's the power of JavaScript. So today, we're going to talk about HTML. HTML, as I said before, is just the rubble. It's the cement. It's the window glass. It's the wood of the door. It's all the resources of the house shoved together into one area. All right. So what is HTML? HTML just is the stuff that is on the screen. It puts the stuff on the screen. And there is a core idea behind the HTML. The idea is tags. And all these tags, each tag has a specific meaning. So HTML is a language that is completely comprised of just tags, and each tag has a meaning. For example, the P tag, it describes what a paragraph is. The H1 tag is describing a header of the type 1. We'll talk more about what that is later. The IMG tag describes an image. And these tags are how you tell the browser what is contained where. So how do you tell the browser that this here is an image? You give it an IMG tag. How do you tell the browser this here's a paragraph? You give it a P tag, and so on and so forth. All right, let's talk more in depth about tags. Tags have a property in that they open and they close. Most of them open and close. So you look at H1, it has an opening tag. It has like those triangle things and the word H1 in between. And the closing tag is very similar. It has a triangle thing, but it also has a slash next to it. So that's the closing tag. And usually you put stuff in between the opening and closing tag that you want to be part of that tag stuff. What does that mean? We'll get to it in a second. What do any of these tags mean? We'll get to it in a second. All right. So first, we're going to start talking about 4 main tags. And here, I would like you to move over to your helpful starter code. It's in the Notion. It's in the Slack. Pop it open. Get it running. So here, I just have it open in Sublime, which is just an editor. You can use any editor you want. And here, I just have index.html file that you see right here, opened up in Chrome. 2 things set up side by side. One's going to edit, the other's going to show us what's going on. All right. So first, let's talk about the parts of this code, right? The first part you see right here, doc type HTML. What is this? This line tells the browser the file that follows is of the type HTML. Why do we need to tell the browser this? Well, because there's many types of files that the browser can read. It can read an XML file. It can read an HTML3 file, an HTML5 file, an HTML file. So how does it know which file type this is? So you give it a doc type to tell the browser what the type of your file is. Then you see this HTML tag right here, and you notice immediately that it opens and closes. So going back to the previous tab, notice that the doc type tag does not close. This is completely on purpose. I mentioned that most tags open and close. Doc type tag is one that does not close. All right, moving back on to the HTML tag. It opens and closes and everything inside of the HTML tag is the HTML of the website. So everything that you will put inside this tag is the HTML, and nothing outside is the HTML. All right. Then there's the head tag. We put all of our metadata inside of the head tag. What is metadata? No, it's data about data. I know that's not too helpful, but the basic idea behind metadata is that it's data that the user is not supposed to see, but that the browser is supposed to know. So it's not the stuff that's displayed on this screen right here, but it is stuff that the browser needs to know to make your website work correctly. We'll talk about examples in just a little while. So moving on, then there's the body tag. What's the point of the body tag? Well, the body tag is supposed to contain everything that you see on this website right here. Right now, there's nothing in the body, so you see nothing in the website. But you can, and we will, start putting stuff in the body tag to make it render on that web page right there. All right, now that we have everything, our basic setup, let's go into tags. The first tag we'll talk about is the H1 tag. And we're going to start writing as well. So the way tags work is that you have an opening tag, a closing tag, and then you write text in between them. This is an H1 tag. And when you reload this page, you'll see that it pops up. You'll see that it's kind of big and it's kind of bolded, but you wouldn't know that. You haven't seen other tags. So let's do something. Let's do an H2 tag. That's header 2. The headers are arranged numerically in size. So H1 is the biggest, H2 smaller, H3 smaller, so on and so forth. Let's do one more, H3, just to get our complete intuition about these tags. Boom. Lovely. H1, H2, H3. Exactly how we want them to be. All right. And then we have another tag. It's called the P tag. So we've done headers, but a good essay, a good writing has headers and paragraphs, right? So the P tag is our paragraphs. We'll wrap things around them and we'll say this is a paragraph. And when you see it's smaller and it's thinner because paragraphs are not bolded or huge. So notice here that HTML has some inbuilt styling for it. And this is just for traditional displays, but notice, just keep in mind, HTML, some styling. All right, what do we got next? The A tag. So remember how I mentioned that the internet is just a bunch of links? Maybe I didn't, but the internet is just a bunch of links connected to each other in one giant network, right? So the power of the internet is to just take a link and put it on your website and it just takes you to some other place. That's your anchor tag, your A tag. And here we've introduced something else as well, which is the href attribute. Href is the HTTP reference that this A tag is going to go to. So this A tag is supposedly going to go to web@berkeley.org. It needs something to close and it needs text in between it. There we go. And when we reload it, look at that. And when we click at it, look, it'll get us to web@berkeley.org. Oop, I may have misspelled something, so it's not working. Oh, wait, I wrote edu, org. And now it should work. Boom, look at that. Gets us to web@berkeley. All right, so that's the A tag. Now let's talk about the next tag, which is the lists. Awesome. Let's talk about lists, shall we? How do lists work? Well, first we know that there's two types of lists. And here I'll quickly introduce comments as well. Comments are written like this. They begin with like the same things. And then there's an exclamation point in double dashes and end with a double dash and a triangle thingy. All right, there's two types of lists, unordered lists and ordered lists. Let's discuss ordered lists first. So to make an ordered list, you gotta wrap it in an OL element. But the problem is you can't just add text here, right? How will OL know where one line starts and another doesn't? Imagine you had a super duper long line that enters don't really categorize lines. So to distinguish elements inside of an ordered list, we use the LI tag. And now look at this. Boom, look, 1, 2. That's the power of the ordering. Every list item, LI, contains some text or some other object. We'll discuss that later. And a bunch of list items consists of an OL tag. So an OL tag is a way to group a lot of list items together into one unit. All right, what if I don't want these to be ordered? What if I just want them together in some form? Well, you could use the UL tag, which is an unordered list. And notice the UL tag is just bullet points, right? So we know how to do lists and bullet points now. All right, awesome. What do we got next? Buttons. Let's talk about buttons. Everyone loves buttons. There we go. Look at that. A button that does nothing. That's so cool. All right, so we have a button that does nothing. Why is this useful? Why does this exist? Because sometimes it does something when you actually give it some functionality, which we haven't here, and we're not going to, because functionality does not belong in HTML. HTML just throws this stuff together. It gives you a button, but what figures out functionality? What figures out responsiveness? That's right, it's JavaScript. So the way the button operates is going to be dictated by JavaScript, but the existence of the button is defined in HTML. So if you've done that, in about a week or so, you will know how to make buttons work as well. All right. Next tag, images. Let's talk about images. This is a fun one, right? So here's how you describe an image. You use an IMG tag, and you use an SRC, which is a link to the image. It can be internal, so we can link to this wdb.png right here and give it some alt text. This is an image. And that, boom, there we go. I want you to note something, that I give it some alt text. What is alt? It is a text that describes the image. Why is this important? Well, imagine the link is mistyped, right? Look, it's right here now. So if the image does not display, you don't want the users of your website to not know what was there. So alt text takes the place of the image in case the image does not render, which is why the alt text is important, because it is quite a replacement, but it's the last resort way of seeing an image. It's also extremely important in terms of accessibility, because people who can't see your website should still be able to know every single part of it. So describing your images carefully, succinctly, but still with some amount of thoroughness is very important to making sure everyone can use your website, regardless of if they can view your website or if they can't. All right, so that's about images. A quick note, an image link can also be an HTTPS link. So for example, let's look at web development at Berkeley. And instead, let's go to images. Start going to the website itself. And here we have this lovely image that you may have seen on the front page of our website. And now we're going to copy the image address. We're going to paste it in here. Boom. Now we're going to, oh, my bad. You want to remove this. The HTTP doesn't need anything before it. And now, moment of truth. Drum roll, please, folks. Oh my God, that's too big. It's too big to fit the screen. Look at that. All right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put the old image back, but as you can see, you can also load HTTP images in your website. It's a bad idea usually, because what if the person changes the link? Then your link's broken. So it's much better most often to house the image yourself inside of your website. All right, awesome. Next thing. All right, we're gonna skip over text area. Please feel free to go through it on your own. It's not that important right now. We're also gonna skip over select an option, and you're also gonna skip over forms and tables. We're gonna go to divs. So what are divs? It seems like a really weird idea to skip over all of this and go to divs, because as you'll notice, divs are kind of useless. They don't do anything. So why am I teaching them? Why are they so important? Well, because at sometimes you want to categorize things together. You want to put them together in one unit and pretend it's one thing, right? So, for example, imagine this button and this image right here, right? I want to somehow say that this is one unit. How am I supposed to do that? Well, putting them next to each other doesn't work. That doesn't make them a unit, not in HTML at least. So the way to say that this image and this button are one unit is to wrap them in a div tag. Boom. This is going to do anything? No. The button and the link do not change. It does not make the link clickable, and it does not make the button an image. It does precisely nothing for now. However, once you start doing HTML, once you start doing CSS in JavaScript, you'll see that it does a lot of things, the divs. So imagine if I wanted to put a boundary around both the button and the image, right? If I didn't put a div around it, there'd be no way to do it. But if I did put a div around it, do not tell any of the other teachers that I did this. I'm not supposed to introduce this yet, but let's do it. All right, border. Border 1 px solid black. That's CSS right there. Don't tell them. But notice how there's a border around both of these things now, because they were in a unit together, even though you couldn't see that. So it's kind of curious that HTML has something that CSS uses, but CSS can't introduce things to the website. It can only style the things that already exist. So we have to put the div inside of our HTML and then style it in CSS to put these things together in some form. We're going to remove that link, but hopefully that was a somewhat decent explanation about why we need divs. And divs don't need to be just these two. It could be the two lists as well. Maybe we want to assume that the lists are one unit. So we put a div around those lists, and now those lists are one unit. Again, it doesn't change anything whatsoever, but it does club them together. So when you style them, you can style the div and style the both of them simultaneously, right? Awesome. We're going to skip over span, and we're going to go to title. All right. So we're done with the body for now, believe it or not. We're going to go to the head. And we already put a giant heading tag here. So what is this title thing going? What is this doing? Well, you notice this index.html right up here. We don't really want to display index.html. Notice how Google manages to display whatever's the search name, and Web at Berkeley manages to display web development at Berkeley. So how do you change that? Well, you use a title tag. You say, this is the title. Boom. Look at that. This is the title. You can change things up there. Why should you care about this? Well, Google cares about this. So when Google tries to display websites on its big array of websites, the way it does this is that it picks up this title tag right here and makes it your title. Also notice that Google not only displays titles, it also displays these small paragraphs. Sometimes they're straight from what the website is saying. Often they're not. Often these are completely unique. For example, this web dev paragraph, I doubt you'll find on the front page. Look. So where does Google pick this up from? Well, there's something called the meta tag. And remember how we talked about metadata? This is where it comes in. The meta tag takes in a name about what the metadata is about. Here we're going to give the website a description, and then we're going to assign the content of this description to be, say, web dev at Berkeley. And unfortunately, you will see no difference to the website. None at all. In fact, it will be even less obvious than the div example, because this is not changing the website in any way. It's not changing the display in any way. The user doesn't need to know you did this. But when Google's bots come crawling through and go through the website to try to search index your website, they're going to pick this up and they're going to pick this up. And that's what's going to be displayed on your website. Awesome. All right. That's title. That's meta. Let's get to classes and IDs. So let's go back to our house analogy, right? So you have a house, you have windows and doors and all those things, right? You have a window on the first floor and you have a window on the second floor, and you want some way to match the window on the first floor and the second floor. You want them to be figuratively related to each other, if not actually. They're not actually related to each other. So they're not in the same div, right? They're not in the same division of the house, but you do want them somehow metaphorically connected. You want them to have the same things. You want them to have the same class. This is the idea of classes. So imagine this P is our first Windows representative. So we can tag this as a window, and this button is our second Windows representative. You can tag this as a window. So now, even though P is somewhere right up there on the page and the button's right down there on the page, they're still related by having the same class called window. And now you can operate on them in the same way in CSS and JavaScript. That we'll not cover that today, but just know that they're related by being in the same class now. But using the same analogy of the house, you have a lot of doors in the house, right? Imagine you need to make one door the front door. This is the main door of the house. There cannot be another one. How do you make a door the main door of the house? Well, that's a property called ID. So while there can be many instances of a class on a web page, there can be only one tag that is assigned to an ID. So if I give this ID main door, there cannot be another ID equals main door on this page. Why do we need classes and IDs? Well, classes to club things together, and maybe you want to make every single window the color green. Either you could go in and find everything you consider a window and then make it a color green individually, or you tag all of them window and you tell CSS to make everything that is a window green. So it makes all of it green. So that's the power of classes. What about IDs? IDs are more, you can still use IDs in CSS as well, but they're more a JavaScript concept, right? So imagine every time the main door is clicked, you want like a alert to ring through your website. Every time that H3 is clicked, there's a ping or going off, something like that. There's a sound. So how do you do that? How do you tell JavaScript what door you're looking at? Well, you can go through the entire thing and be like, oh, it's that H3. I want to do that one. Or you could just give it an ID and tell JavaScript to go through the entire website and be like, okay, this is the ID. Find the element that has this ID and make its property that once you click a bell, it goes ping or something like that. So the idea behind the ID is to be able to single out an element and then do something with it. And that's a very JavaScript thing, isn't it? All right, so that's class and ID. The class attribute, ID attribute. All right, we're nearing the end of our big first lecture, so it's very exciting. But let's talk about HTML from a bird's eye view really quickly. So HTML, as you may have noticed, is just very aggressive categorizing. You put every single list item instead of an OL, and you put all the lists inside of a division, and you put everything that's related inside of another division, and then you put all that in the body, and then you put all that in HTML. So you're nesting things that belong together, and you're putting things that belong together, and you're kind of arranging things in a certain order. And you may consider this a little bit boring, and you're completely valid. HTML is a very boring language, but it is also very important. A thing to understand really quickly is that HTML is also a very forgiving language. So if I go down here and I don't use any tags, but I say this is a line, HTML would render it. In fact, if I turn all of this into pure text, I would still manage to like scrap a website out of it. So what's the point of this aggressive tagging and IDing and class naming? Well, first, it's ease of use. It makes for cleaner code. It makes it easier for JavaScript and CSS to read your code, and it makes it's much easier for you to read your own code, right? Even the tabbing is not necessary. I could put this line right here and it would still render the same way, but it's much easier to read when it's cleanly tabbed. So that's why you write code like this. But a more important reason, and perhaps a more essential reason, is because not everyone can see your website. Not everyone will be able to look at this H1 and H2 and H3 tag and see that they kind of belong together. There's people who still want to be able to use your website who can't see it. They're just maybe listening to it. And if you don't put things together, they don't realize they're together. If you don't put your headers in H tags, H1, H2, H3, they're not spoken that way. So they may miss something very important. They will not have the same experience that someone who can see your website will. And that's bad, folks. That's really, really bad. Because the internet should be a place for everyone. Every website that you make should be accessible to everyone, irrespective of whether they're listening to it or looking at it, or if they have fast internet or slow internet or any of those things. it's also important for your website to be obvious. If a 60-year-old is using it, they should know what's going on. Or if a 10-year-old is using it, they should also have a pretty good idea about your website. And HTML categorizing, HTML tagging, and class naming, and ID naming, it helps with all of this. It helps make it makes the internet a more inclusive place. And now that you're starting on this journey to kind of figure out web development, it's very important to keep that in mind. Don't develop just for the sake of development. Develop for literally everyone who may ever visit your webpage. All right, so that's my spiel about accessibility and trying to make your HTML as clean and well tagged as possible. And yeah, try to get your GitHub set up. If you don't, we'll do it next class, so don't worry about it. That is the end of this class. If you have any questions, feel free to message them to me or drop them in the education chats, education Slack channel, and I will respond to them as soon as possible. All right, yeah, I'm so excited for you to get started on this journey and get started CSS next class. I will see you then. Bye-bye.